Welcome, travelers of the dark. Here, every story is a winding road where light dares not enter. Settle in, draw the curtains on the world outside, and prepare to hear what most would rather forget. Tonight, we dive into real stories, stories that happened to ordinary people, but left scars even time couldn't erase. There's an abandoned motel called the Royal Hawaiian Motel. It's been abandoned for well over a decade. I do a lot of solo urban exploration, sometimes at night, and this place is located in Baker, California. During the day, it gets blisteringly hot, way too hot to be walking around with a backpack. So I chose to explore the motel at night. It was very easy to get to. I parked on the side of the road and walked over. There was no fence to climb, no gate, and no security. Definitely one of the easiest structures I've ever explored. In the back, there was a deep, empty pool, completely covered in graffiti. I pointed my flashlight up toward the motel building and noticed that half of the upstairs room doors were either slightly ajar or completely shattered. It looked creepy, but honestly, that was expected for a place left abandoned for so long. I knew I wasn't the first person to explore here. Part of the building looked like it had been damaged in a fire, completely blackened and half collapsed. I looked around outside for a while. Since it was late, there was no sound of passing cars. The only thing I could hear was the crunch of my shoes stepping over debris. Then suddenly, my blood ran cold. I heard a female voice nearby. My immediate reaction in situations like this is to assume it's either a security guard or someone who could be trouble. I usually try to disappear and hide. That's exactly what I did. I ran into one of the rooms on the ground floor and turned off my flashlight. After a minute of silence, I turned it back on. I looked around the room I was in. The walls were covered in graffiti and there was just one piece of furniture. A small 4-drawer dresser and an old dusty mattress on the floor. I wondered if maybe homeless people ever slept there. But considering how far it is from any real town, I doubted it. I left the room and continued checking out the rest of the motel. I peeked into every room I could access on the ground floor, below the upper level walkway. Most of them were similar: scattered furniture, broken mattresses, random spray paint all over. Suddenly, I heard a crashing sound from above, like something had fallen. My heart skipped a beat. I stepped outside and aimed my flashlight up toward the walkway and broken doors. Then I decided to go upstairs and investigate. I assumed it was probably an animal, but you never know. It could be another explorer or someone else. I went up and peeked into each room along the way. Every room looked more or less the same: junk, broken furniture, mattresses, general decay. As I walked further along the walkway, I heard a banging sound. It grew louder. As I got closer, it was a slow, repetitive thump, thump. 2 seconds, thump, 2 seconds. Someone was definitely up there. I approached the room where the noise was coming from. Just as I got close to the door, the banging stopped. Maybe they heard me coming. I called out that I was just exploring and meant no harm. I peeked into the dark room, flashlight off. It was almost pitch black, but I'm about 50% sure I saw a person near the back wall. The room reeked of feces. I pulled my head back out, looked at my flashlight, and then got ready to turn it back on. making sure not to point it directly inside. First, I aimed it down at the floor, then slowly raised it into the room. That's when I saw two pale, bare feet rushing toward me. Instinctively, I flicked the light higher and saw a woman with a bloodied forehead, her mouth hanging open, covered in some kind of yellow goo. It looked like something out of a nightmare. I ran as fast as I could. I could hear her screaming as I fled, and the screams weren't getting any quieter. She was chasing me. I bolted down the stairs, out of the building, and back to my car. Luckily, she didn't follow me that far. Once inside, I called my friend George, who's also into urban exploration. I had invited him to join me that night, but he wasn't able to. I told him what happened. We both came to a disturbing conclusion that the banging sound I heard was her slamming her head against the wall, which would explain the bloody forehead. I asked him if I should call the police, just thinking out loud. He said, "Definitely not. That would be admitting to trespassing." I drove around a bit, trying to find a payphone to call the police anonymously, but of course, payphones are basically extinct now. In the end, I called the non-emergency line and reported a deranged woman at the motel, pretending I was not the one who saw her. I claimed I had just heard about it. I was as vague as possible and hung up quickly. I don't know if police ever investigated, but whatever was going on with that woman, she clearly needed help. She should have been in a psych ward or hospital, and in all my years of exploring, I've never encountered anything like that. A few years ago, I lived in a small town. My family decided to move us 4 hours away to get away from all the drama. While my parents were out of town looking at houses, I invited a friend over and called up my cousins to plan a little road trip. The place we wanted to visit was basically off limits, but we were daredevils and wanted to experience something scary. We chose a location that was about 2 to 3 hours away called Bryce Hospital. It was supposedly haunted due to its dark history. A former psychiatric facility where mentally ill patients were allegedly mistreated and tortured. As the patient population declined over the years, the hospital eventually shut down, and the building started to rot and succumb to nature. We decided to leave around 11 p.m., hoping to arrive by 2 a.m. The car ride was fun and filled with excitement. We were pumped to see what we might find. We got there at around 2:43 a.m., stopping at the beginning of a long dirt road that led to the hospital. We sat there in the car for about 10 minutes, unsure if we really wanted to go through with it. We all had a bad feeling. After some silence and nervous glances, we decided to go ahead. The dirt road felt endless. The grass was overgrown, branches were scattered everywhere, and it was pitch black. We could barely even see the road. We finally reached the building and stood there in awe. It was massive. The roof was rotting, and vines had grown all over the exterior walls. In the middle of what used to be the parking lot, there was an old water fountain, also covered in vines. It was so dark, we could only see what the headlights lit up. We turned the car off and got out. As we walked into the building, the first thing I noticed were spray-painted pentagrams all over the walls. We kept walking deeper inside and made our way up the stairs, which was a struggle because most of the steps were broken or missing. We climbed a ladder to get onto what was left of the roof. While up there, we noticed a light in the front of the building. It looked like a phone flashlight. We called out, but no one answered. The light disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. My cousin told us to follow him into another room so we could regroup, but I had a terrible gut feeling. I wandered off into a room next to the one they were in. It had old mattresses and more graffiti on the walls. I could still hear my cousins talking when suddenly I heard a faint sound, like a rock hitting the window of the room I was in. I didn't think much of it and kept looking around. I eventually rejoined my cousins and friend, and we decided to check out the basement. Getting down there was rough since the stairs were destroyed. Once we finally made it to the bottom, we stopped to catch our breath. That's when we heard a voice from the back of the room. We all froze and looked at each other. I didn't want to move. I was scared that if I did, whatever was back there would come after me. My cousin started walking slowly toward the voice, his flashlight shining into the darkness. As the light reached the back wall, we saw a man squatting facing the wall. My cousin slowly backed away, keeping the light on him. Once he got back to us, we all started climbing out the way we came. Just as my cousin pulled himself up, he called out, asking the man if he was okay. The man turned to face us, staring blankly. There was a moment of silence before the man suddenly let out a wild scream and started running toward us. We all started screaming and bolting in different directions. We had no idea where to go, so we climbed out through a nearby window and ended up in the woods behind the building. I remember running, hearing him right behind me, and screaming as I tried to catch up with the others. My cousins were ahead of me, and I could see their flashlights fading into the trees. I ran into so many branches and trees that my entire body ached. Eventually, I caught up with them in a clearing where we found a trail and tried to find our way back to the car. We walked in the wrong direction for about an hour before realizing and turning around. The way back was rough, but eventually we saw the hospital again. We all sighed in relief, knowing we were close to the car. Just as we approached it, we heard rustling in the bushes by the building, and just like before, a rock flew out and hit my friend. Then we saw the man emerge from the bush. We took off running toward the car. Thankfully, he was far enough behind that we were able to jump in and lock the doors. As we started the car, the headlights came on, and we saw him running straight at us, screaming and banging on the windows with a glass bottle. We threw it into drive and took off. The whole way home, we sat in complete silence, trying to process what just happened. My whole body was trembling. After that night, none of us ever wanted to go urban exploring again. You know when you promise yourself you'll get things done quickly? Just sign a few papers, I kept telling myself. 1 week, tops. That's what I was thinking as I dragged my old suitcase down the grimy hallway of the seaside motel, the only cheap place I could find in the town of Medford. The red carpet was stained. The lights flickered weakly. The receptionist barely looked at me as she handed over the key to room 206. No questions, no greetings. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking louder than the last, and found myself facing an almost oppressively empty hallway. The doors were all closed, cracked, some with crooked numbers barely hanging on. Room 206 was halfway down the corridor. The key was one of those old heavy metal ones. When I stepped inside, a wave of musty air mixed with cheap disinfectant hit me. There was a sagging double bed, a broken dresser, and an old tube TV bolted to the wall. It was just 1 week, I reminded myself. 1 week. That first night I barely slept. The walls were too thin. I could hear everything, the neighbor's TV, the hiss of water running, slow footsteps in the hallway. It felt like the whole world was pressed up against my ears. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound I couldn't immediately place. Muffled crying. It was coming from the room next door. 207. Uneven, like someone trying hard not to let the sobs escape. I lay there, wide awake, not knowing what to do. Should I knock on the wall? Call the front desk? Ignore it? In the end, I just turned over and tried to forget. The next morning, I casually asked the receptionist about the guest in 207. She blinked slowly and answered without taking her eyes off the soap opera playing on the small TV. 207's empty. I tried to laugh it off. Must have been a mistake. Maybe the receptionist was confused. Maybe someone was staying there and she just didn't know. But as the day went on, the feeling of unease didn't go away. It just sat there under my skin, like a low, persistent itch. I spent most of the afternoon tangled up in paperwork at my lawyer's office, only getting back to the motel after dark. The second-floor hallway looked even darker than it had that morning, like the weak lamps on the ceiling couldn't quite push back the grime. When I got to my door, 206, I noticed something. The doorknob on 207, the room next to mine, it was moving slightly. Just a soft shift, like someone had just let go of it. I froze for a second, heart knocking against my ribs. Then I hurried into my room and double-locked the door behind me. I took a quick shower, ordered a terrible hamburger from a nearby diner, left the TV on for background noise. But around midnight, I started hearing it again. The slow, dragging footsteps in the hallway. Not steady, more like someone taking a few steps, pausing, then a few more. I muted the TV and listened. They stopped right outside my door. Nothing. Just silence. I sat frozen on the bed, listening to the thudding in my own ears. After what felt like forever, I crept toward the door and peeked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, just the dim, flickering light and the endless carpet stretching both ways. I thought about going downstairs to complain, but what would I even say? I heard footsteps, saw a shadow. It sounded ridiculous. So I stayed. Sat on the edge of the bed, breathing shallowly, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, sleep pulled me under. Uneasy, shallow sleep. And sometime later, through the haze of half-dream, I heard a new sound. A voice. Whispering. Right through the thin wall between my room and 207. So faint I could barely make out the words. Just the heavy breath between them. But I caught one phrase, like a hook, sinking into my brain. You're going to stay too. I woke up before sunrise with a bitter taste in my mouth and my stomach twisted into knots. It felt like the whole room had gotten heavier overnight. That voice from the night before kept replaying in my head. You're going to stay too. I got up and went straight to the wall that separated my room from 207, pressed my ear against it. Nothing. No TV sounds, no footsteps, no signs of life. But there was something. That feeling, like when you walk into a room and sense someone's just left. Like the air still remembers. I grabbed my key, deciding I needed to get out of there. Maybe a coffee, maybe just the buzz of the street would clear my head. When I opened the door to 206, I froze. The door to 207 was slightly ajar, just a crack, but enough to reveal the complete darkness inside. No light, no movement. The hallway suddenly felt colder. The red carpet under my feet seemed to swallow up every sound. I stood there, trying to decide. Check it out? Walk away? Before I could think it through, my body moved on its own. I crossed the short distance and pushed the door open gently with my fingertips. Room 207 was empty, at least at first glance. The bed was made, perfectly made, almost too perfect. The curtains were pinned shut with rusted clips, and the smell, old stale, like boxes abandoned for years in a damp basement. I stepped in a little further. My eyes adjusted slowly to the dark. That's when I saw it. A large mirror covered almost the entire wall opposite the bed, but the reflection wasn't right. In the mirror, the bed wasn't empty. In the mirror, a figure was lying there, tucked under a dark sheet up to the neck. Frozen, I stepped back, looked directly at the bed. Empty. Glanced back at the mirror. The figure was still there, motionless. I felt something tighten at the base of my spine. Not just fear, but a deep, ancient certainty. If I stayed there even a second longer, whatever was on the other side would know I could see it. I ran. Back to 206, locking the door behind me, chest heaving with shallow, broken breaths. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat in the stained armchair, staring at the door, waiting for the handle to turn. But it never did. The night dragged on, slow and painful, stretching out each second until it frayed at the edges. And when morning finally came, the hallway looked normal. No open doors, no strange sounds, just the silent, empty hallway of the seaside motel. The next morning, I packed my things in silence. Every sound from the zipper of my suitcase seemed too loud in that cramped little room. I needed to get out of there, needed to breathe somewhere else. I hurried down the stairs, ignoring the motel's free coffee. The woman at the front desk didn't even lift her eyes from her magazine when she saw me. "Checking out, please," I said, trying to sound casual. She held out her hand without looking. I fished the heavy key out of my pocket and placed it in her palm. For a second, she froze. Still staring at her magazine, the corners of her mouth lifted in a barely there smile. "You were in 206, right?" she asked, voice flat. I nodded, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "It's always 206, she mumbled, more to herself than to me. Before I could ask what she meant, she pulled out a form, scribbled a few numbers, and said, "All set. Safe travels." I didn't stick around. I crossed the cracked parking lot, feeling the cold morning air sting my skin. I tossed my suitcase into the back seat, started the engine, and took a long, shaky breath. That was it. Just an old motel. Old walls, old echoes. The mind fills in the blanks when it's tired enough. I knew that. I shifted into drive and started pulling out of the parking lot. That's when I glanced into the rear-view mirror. On the second floor of the motel, just barely leaning against the wall beside 206, stood a man. Tall, thin, wearing a plain shirt, hands in his pockets. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, staring into the distance like he was waiting for something or someone. I turned my head to look directly, but from that angle the hallway was empty. When I looked back in the mirror, he was still there, unmoving. I pressed down on the gas. I left the seaside motel behind without looking again. But even miles down the empty road, even under the bright rising sun, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, in some way I couldn't understand, I hadn't really left at all. My name is Ethan Collins. I'm 32 years old, and like most people I know, I'm not exactly where I thought I would be by now. I live alone in a rented house tucked away in Brookmere, a small town in rural Pennsylvania, crisscrossed by old roads and endless fields. I work as a network technician, which means I spend more time driving from place to place than sitting in an office. The house is simple, a single story with faded paint and a porch that creaks with the wind. I rented it because it was cheap and close to Route 37, the road I use for most of my service calls. It was supposed to be temporary, but I've been here for almost a year now. It's not the kind of place where things happen, and honestly, that's exactly what I was looking for. I used to think that if you stayed quiet enough, the world would forget about you. That peace would come naturally. But lately, I've been rethinking that. It all started almost laughably small. Just another ordinary night, driving home after a call in Westbrook. The sun had already disappeared, and the road, as always, was deserted. It was just me, my headlights, and a tunnel of trees stretching endlessly on both sides. I was about 20 minutes from home when I saw something by the side of the road. A figure, standing still. At first, I thought it was someone needing help. I slowed down, but as I got closer, I realized he wasn't moving. Not even when my headlights swept over him. It was a man, or at least it seemed like one. Wearing dark clothes, a heavy jacket despite the unseasonably warm weather. His head was bowed, staring at the ground. But what really made me step on the gas was something else. He was barefoot. I drove past him. My heart raced for no real reason. Just a guy on the road, right? Maybe a drifter, maybe someone lost. Nothing to worry about. But when I got home, something felt wrong. The back door, which I was sure I had locked that morning, was slightly ajar. The wind, I thought. Probably just the wind. I walked inside cautiously, checked every room, everything in place. No sign of a break-in. I closed the door, locked it, and tried to move on. I couldn't. That night, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. with a cold, heavy feeling. The sense that I wasn't alone. But there was no sound, no movement, nothing. Just my own breathing and the soft creak of the old house settling against the wind. I smiled weakly in the dark. Paranoia, I whispered to myself. That's all it is. Tomorrow, everything would go back to normal. I had no idea that it would be the last peaceful night I'd have for a long time. The next morning, everything seemed back to normal. Coffee in my chipped mug, the smell of old wood, angry client emails. The slow, familiar rhythm I had forced myself to get used to. Until I stepped outside. My car was parked where it always was, but something was wrong. Very wrong. The right side mirror was hanging loose, swinging in the wind. Not dented, not broken, just detached, as if someone had carefully ripped it off. I stood there staring at it, nausea curling in my gut. Nobody tampers with a car like that by accident. It was a warning, or worse, a marking. I went to work anyway. All day I felt eyes boring into my back. Every slow-moving car, every person lingering on a sidewalk seemed suspicious. I spent the day missing routes, forgetting appointments, spilling coffee on paperwork. It wasn't like me. I drove home before sunset. I needed to check the locks, the windows. I knew that if nightfall caught me off guard, something bad would happen. The house looked the same. Door closed, windows intact, no signs of forced entry. I breathed a shaky sigh of relief. Then I saw it for the first time. Something snagged on the old wooden fence that bordered the woods behind my yard. I walked closer. It was a torn piece of dark fabric, like from a heavy jacket, exactly like the one the man by the road had been wearing. My hands trembled as I picked it up. There was a smell on it, a sharp, acrid scent, like damp earth mixed with something harsher, something that turned my stomach. I dropped it immediately, ran back inside, locked everything, shut the curtains, turned off the lights. That night, I didn't sleep. And for the first time, I heard it. the sound of footsteps outside slowly circling the house. I lay frozen in bed, the blanket pulled up to my chin, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it filled the whole room. The footsteps were slow, dragging. They moved back and forth, as if whoever was out there was studying every inch of the house. I grabbed my phone. No signal. I had always promised myself I wouldn't be the kind of person who runs into a basement or into the woods when something weird happens. But at that moment, standing still felt even worse. I got up slowly. Each creaking floorboard sounded like a gunshot. I made my way to the living room, trying to peek through the gaps in the curtains. Nothing but the crushing darkness and the warped shadows of the trees swaying in the wind. But when I turned toward the front door, I saw it. A mark. A handprint smeared on the fogged glass. A large hand with long fingers, dirty and maybe smeared with dried blood. My stomach twisted. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the biggest knife I could find. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but the weight in my hand gave me a false sense of control. I waited. Each second dragged on, endlessly. The scraping sound of something brushing against the front wall. A light tap against the kitchen window. I couldn't take it anymore. I threw open the back door and bolted toward the woods. The night swallowed me whole, and I no longer knew who was hunting who. The woods were a tangled mess of twisted bushes and low-hanging branches. Every step I took sounded deafening in the night. Behind me, the sound of the back door slamming against the house. He had entered. My chest burned from the lack of air. I couldn't stop. I kept running, getting scratched by branches, stumbling over unseen stones. After a while, I don't know how long, I collapsed to my knees. The silence was total. No footsteps, no signs of pursuit. But I knew he was still out there. I could feel it, a heavy presence pressing against the night. I crouched low, trying to hear any movement. That's when I noticed. Up ahead, a faint light flickering between the trees. A flashlight. Someone was swinging it side to side, methodically, searching. My heart almost exploded. The light swept across the forest, and for a moment it illuminated a silhouette. Tall, wearing a dark jacket. The same man. He knew I was there. I crawled away on my stomach, pressing against the cold, damp ground, trying not to make a sound. My mind raced. Run? Hide? Go back to the house? No choice felt safe. The beam of light swept closer, so close I could hear the soft crunch of a branch under his weight. I grabbed a stone the size of my hand. It felt ridiculous to think it would protect me, but it was all I had. I moved slowly, inching away from the light. 1 meter, 2, then I stepped on something. A dry twig snapped beneath my foot, loud as a gunshot. The flashlight swung toward me instantly. "I found you," a voice said. Low, rough, like metal scraping metal. I shot up and ran harder than I ever had. Behind me, heavy footsteps, labored breathing. In the chaos, I saw an old wire fence up ahead. Beyond it, open fields. If I could get across, maybe I could reach the road. I ran toward it, feeling the cold air cutting my sweaty skin. I jumped. The wire tore my shirt and scratched my stomach, but I rolled over to the other side. Behind me, the flashlight paused. The man didn't climb immediately. He just stood there, holding the light high, watching me. I stumbled to my feet and sprinted down the dirt road, not looking back. I ran until my legs gave out. I ran until I saw a house with lights on at the bend of the road. I pounded on the door, not caring how crazy I looked. The door opened. A middle-aged woman stared at me, shocked and scared. "Help! Please! There's a man!" I gasped. Before I could finish, she pulled me inside, shut the door. locked it. For a moment, I thought I was safe, but something in her eyes made me shiver, something I couldn't quite understand yet. She led me to the kitchen without saying a word. The house smelled of damp wood and bleach. I sat at the table, still shaking. My shirt torn, my hands scratched and dirty. The woman filled a glass of water and placed it in front of me. Her hand, I noticed, was trembling slightly. "You need to call the police," she said, her voice firm but low. I nodded, trying to catch my breath. I grabbed my phone again. Still no signal. She saw my frustrated expression and mumbled, "It's always like that out here. Only get a signal closer to the main road." She offered me the landline. An old beige phone, the cord twisted like a sleeping snake. I dialed 911. Nothing, no dial tone. I tried again. Nothing. "Must be from last night's storm," she said, but there was little conviction in her voice. My skin prickled. I tried to push away the paranoia. A storm, old lines, logical explanations. "My husband will be back soon," she said. "He can drive you into town." I nodded, too drained to argue. She turned her back to me, busying herself at the sink. I sat there sipping the water in small gulps, trying not to think about the growing feeling of being trapped. And then I saw it. On top of the fridge, a black flashlight, identical to the one the man had been carrying. I swallowed hard. It could be a coincidence. Common model, black flashlight. Nothing unusual for a country home. But something told me it wasn't just that. "What's your name?" she asked without turning around. "Ethan," I replied. "Ethan," she repeated, as if tasting the name. The sound of tires crunching on gravel made us both turn toward the window. Headlights approached. "That's him," she said, smiling. But it wasn't a smile of relief. It was colder, calculated. I stood up slowly. Outside, the car stopped. A tall man stepped out. Dark jacket. Slow, deliberate steps. The same man, the same one from the road. I felt the blood drain from my face. The woman turned to me fully now, her eyes void of any surprise or kindness. "You'd better cooperate, Ethan," she said, closing the kitchen door with a dry snap, and I realized I'd escaped one trap, only to fall into another. My mind raced, searching for a way out. I faked calm, glanced around, looking for anything I could use. The woman moved slowly toward me, blocking the kitchen door. Behind her, I heard the creak of the front door opening. Footsteps. He was coming inside. I spotted the old landline phone on the table. Heavy, solid. When she took one more step, I grabbed the phone and hurled it with everything I had. It hit her squarely in the face with a sharp crack. She stumbled backward, screaming. I ran. I barreled through the living room, knocking over furniture. Saw the man stepping into the hallway toward me, his face pale, thin, empty of any expression. He lunged. I sidestepped just in time, feeling his fingers graze my arm. I threw my shoulder into the front door, burst into the cold night air. I sprinted down the dirt road, branches scraping my skin, lungs burning. I ran like my life depended on it. Because it did. Far ahead, I saw headlights. A truck. I waved my arms wildly. The truck screeched to a stop. The driver, an old man in a cap, eyes wary, rolled down the window. "Help me!" I shouted. "Why, they're trying to kill me!" He hesitated just a second before unlocking the passenger door. I climbed in without thinking. The truck roared away. I looked back. In the darkness, the woman and the man stood small, watching from the road. The driver said nothing, just drove. Bit by bit, the distance between me and that cursed house grew. Still trembling, I finally took a deep breath for the first time in what felt like hours. I had survived. Later, sitting in a cheap motel room, I wrote it all down. Every detail. Maybe because if I left it locked in my memory, it would haunt me forever. Maybe because telling it was the only way to keep moving forward. If you're reading this, just know, not every empty road leads to peace. Some lead straight to hell. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 27 years old. I work as an editorial assistant for a small adventure magazine in North Carolina, and I've always been the kind of person who prefers the woods over crowds. I grew up camping, exploring hidden trails, diving into freezing rivers. I don't think of myself as brave, just used to the solitude of the forests. But that night at Hollow Creek, I realized no amount of experience had prepared me for what we were about to face. It all started with one of Dylan's impulsive ideas. He was the unofficial leader of our group, always convinced that the riskier the place and the darker the legends, the more worth exploring it was. Hollow Creek isn't that bad, he said. It just has a reputation. Sure, the forest is thick, but nothing we can't handle. There was me, Dylan, Mark, and Jess. 4 friends, 3 backpacks, 2 flashlights, and the reckless confidence of people who believe real danger only happens to someone else. We crossed the small barbed wire fence, marking the boundary of the Federal Reserve. Officially, it was illegal to go in at night. Dylan thought that made it even more exciting. The ground beneath our feet was soft dirt, covered with layers of old leaves. The air smelled thickly of damp and rotting wood. The trail vanished quickly between thick trunks and tangled branches that formed a natural ceiling, blocking out even the moonlight. Just about 2 hours hike to the cave, Dylan said enthusiastically. What if it rains? I asked, not for the first time. We're prepared, Mark replied, hoisting his heavy backpack as proof. I wanted to believe him. We walked in single file, our flashlights carving thin beams of light through the woods. With each step, the sounds of civilization faded away. No more cars, no distant lights. Just the crunch of our boots on the leaves and the occasional snap of a branch. After nearly an hour, we reached a clearing. At its center, a gaping black hole in the earth, the entrance to the Hollow Creek cave. Dylan smiled like he had found buried treasure. There it is, he said excitedly. The opening was larger than I expected, a dark pit framed by irregular rocks slick with moss. We stood there, staring. The air near the cave was colder, and there was a strange smell. Damp earth mixed with something sweeter, almost sickly. Do you hear that? Jess asked suddenly. We fell silent, and then we heard it. A low, irregular sound coming from deep inside the cave, somewhere between breathing and moaning. Probably just an echo, Dylan said quickly, but even he didn't sound so sure. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something was moving in there. Aren't we going in? Dylan asked, trying to sound casual. Jess hesitated. Maybe we should, I don't know, mark the entrance and come back during the day? Dylan laughed. It's just a cave. I stared at the black hole in front of us. Everything inside me screamed to turn around. But I also knew that if I backed out, Dylan would never let me hear the end of it. Let's just take a quick look, I said, more to myself than to them. We turned on our flashlights. The trembling beams barely scratched the darkness inside. We descended carefully, stepping over the slick rocks. The air inside the cave was dense and cold, as if we were crossing into another world. The sound, that low, uneven noise, grew louder. It echoed off the stone walls, coming from somewhere deeper inside. As we moved forward, the passage narrowed. Mark cursed quietly when his backpack scraped against a jutting rock. That's when we saw it. At first, just a shadow at the end of the stone corridor. It looked human, crouched, moving slowly. We froze. Probably just a homeless guy or something, Dylan whispered, though he didn't sound convinced. The figure stood up. It was a man, yes, but there was something profoundly wrong about him. He was tall, unnaturally thin, and his movements were jerky, awkward. Our flashlight beams caught glimpses of his face, dark smudges, sunken eyes, and then he started running, straight at us, without a word, no scream, just a blind, violent sprint. "Run!" I screamed. We turned all at once, stumbling over each other in panic. The flashlights bobbed wildly, throwing frantic shadows across the cave walls. I could hear his footsteps behind us, fast, erratic, closer every second. The exit felt so far away, too far for anyone being hunted. We ran clumsily through the cave, slipping on wet rocks, bouncing off the narrow walls. The sound of the man's footsteps echoed behind us, mixed with our own frantic breathing and scattered shouts. "Left!" Dylan shouted, pointing toward a narrow opening. Mark and Jess immediately veered left, but I hesitated for a second. From what I remembered of the entrance, the main path led straight out. The left turn looked more like a risky detour. "Sarah!" Jess screamed, but I was already running straight ahead down the main trail. I heard Dylan curse behind me. He and Jess had taken the side path. Mark hesitated but ended up following them. I was alone now. I ran without looking back. The sound of the pursuer's footsteps grew fainter. Maybe he had followed the others. My lungs burned. My whole body shook with fear. The cave entrance finally appeared ahead of me, a grayish smudge against the darkness. Almost there. A scream echoed through the stone walls. Jess's voice. I almost turned back. Almost, but survival instinct pushed me forward. I burst out into the clearing, tripping and falling to my knees on the damp ground. The forest surrounded me, dark and silent. I got up, scraped knees stinging, and ran again. I didn't know where, just away from the cave. As I sprinted into the trees, I heard something moving in the brush. Movement. Footsteps. Several footsteps. I froze for a second, trying to decide, run or hide. Before I could do anything, I heard a breathless voice calling my name. "Sarah." I swung my flashlight toward the sound. It was Dylan with Mark and Jess right behind him. They were covered in mud, scratched up but alive. We ran to each other, relief exploding in quick sobs and shaky hugs. "Is he still after us?" I asked, out of breath. "We found a side path," Mark said, still panting. "Managed to lose him." Jess kept glancing back, terrified. "We need to get out of here. Now." Without arguing, we pushed through the forest, not even trying to find the original trail. We just moved in the direction where the trees looked thinner. We crashed through bushes, leapt over fallen logs. The forest felt endless. Every minute that passed without any sign of the man made our hope grow a little more. Finally, after what felt like forever, we saw the barbed wire fence of the reserve. We climbed over it, tearing clothes and scraping knees, but nobody cared. On the other side, the dirt road waited for us. And further down, Dylan's old pickup truck still sat there, untouched. We sprinted to it. When we got inside and locked the doors, the tension finally broke, a mixture of nervous laughter and tears. No one talked much on the drive back. Fear still clung to us like an unwelcome passenger. We knew we were lucky. We didn't tell anyone about the man. We didn't call the police. Deep down, we all understood. If we ever went back to that forest, we might not be so lucky again. I was in the 6th grade when this happened. It all started during the week of Halloween. I stayed after school to help decorate the haunted house for the school's Halloween carnival. I loved hanging around with some of my friends while we helped and got rewarded with pizza. Along with us, there was another kid who also stayed late. I'll call him Chris. We got along during the entire time we stayed after school, and he never gave me any reason to feel uneasy around him. He was genuinely funny and a cool kid. But anyway, fast forward 2 weeks, a group of girls from my class came up to me, super excited and smiling. I asked them what was going on, and they told me I had a secret admirer and that he'd be messaging me that night. I'm not gonna lie, I was curious and a little excited. I wanted to know who it was. Later that night, just as I was getting ready for bed, I got a notification from Messenger, the only app I used at the time to talk to my parents when I was home alone. The message was from Chris. I had completely forgotten I'd added him on Facebook during Halloween. I opened the message. It read, "Maya, I need to talk to you." I got a bit worried and replied quickly, "What's going on? Is everything okay?" To this day, I wish I hadn't replied. The typing bubble stayed on the screen for what felt like 2 full minutes. He was still typing. It felt like forever before his message finally came through. I wasn't ready for what I read. It was a long paragraph where he confessed his love for me, said I'd been driving him crazy since Halloween, and told me how he had tried to impress me during recess with his soccer skills, but I never seemed to notice him. He said he was tired of being ignored and ended with, "So what I'm trying to say is, will you be my girlfriend?" I cringed at every word. I just stared at the message. What the hell? I barely even knew this kid, and we had stopped talking a while ago. I tried to find a way to let him down gently. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I told him I didn't like him that way and that I'd rather just be friends. But I could tell right away that he didn't like that answer. He kept asking me why, and I had to come up with different reasons each time until eventually he stopped replying. The next morning was a nightmare. Some of his friends came up to me saying Chris wanted to kiss me, something he apparently told the whole grade, and they said he'd do it even if he had to corner me. I took that as a threat and told my teacher. She told me to stay inside during recess and lunch, and that if he got anywhere near me, I should run straight back to the classroom. But that wasn't enough for me. I went to the principal and told him everything. He said he'd take care of it right away, which gave me some relief. I should mention I lived right across the street from the school, and everyone knew that, including Chris. Which brings me to what happened next. Later that week, I was walking home. I hadn't even been inside for 2 minutes when someone knocked on the door. I looked out the window and saw someone ducking behind a parked car across the street. It had to be Chris. He must have followed me home. My mom opened the door and found a piece of paper on the ground, addressed to me. I read it aloud. It said, "There's a surprise waiting for you under the Cadillac in your driveway." At the time, that car belonged to my brother. My mom went to check but didn't find anything. But after that day, my brother's Cadillac stopped working. To this day, I have no idea what Chris did to it, but my brother ended up having to sell the car. Unfortunately, my nightmare didn't end there. I was constantly harassed by Chris's friends, telling me to give him a chance, that he'd treat me right. One time, I actually caught Chris taking a photo of me while I was walking home. The only reason I noticed was because I barely heard the iPhone camera sound behind me. Who knows how many pictures he had of me. Every morning, I'd wake up to a message from him saying things like, "Can't wait to see you at school," or "I bet you'll look beautiful today." The stalking and harassment were getting worse, and I was honestly scared, especially now that he knew where I lived. Finally, I got called into the counselor's office. I felt relieved, expecting to be told Chris was going to get punished, or maybe even the police would be involved. Anything. But what I heard was worse. The counselor told me, boys will be boys. They do crazy things when they're in love, and that I shouldn't be mad about it. She said I should feel flattered, that things like this were bound to happen to girls, and that the only thing I could do was accept it and learn from it. At the time, I didn't even realize how messed up that was. I believed her, but looking back now, it was absolutely insane and disturbing to say that to a 6th grade girl who was being harassed and feared for her safety every day. That afternoon, I went home and told my mom everything the counselor said. She was furious, rightfully so. Later that week, I was called into the principal's office again, but this time, my mom was with me. I clearly remember her saying to the counselor and the principal, "What are you waiting for? For something bad to happen to her before you do something?" She kept asking why it was taking so long for them to act. They both stayed completely silent. My mom ended it by threatening the counselor and telling her, "Don't ever talk to my daughter again unless I'm present." Unfortunately, I don't think the school ever punished Chris, and that still makes me angry to this day. He got away with everything, and it still wasn't over. The weekend night, while my parents were out shopping, I was just about to go to bed after watching a YouTube video on my iPad when I heard something hit my window. I'm on the 2nd floor, so that was strange. The only thing that ever hits my window is birds flying into it by mistake. I sat up and listened. It happened again. It sounded like someone was throwing something at the glass. Then again, and again. They were consistent thuds, and it started to really freak me out. I finally built up the courage to get out of bed and see what it was. My heart sank when I opened the curtain and looked down. Chris was standing there, holding a handful of rocks, looking straight up at my window. He had somehow figured out exactly which room was mine. He was about to throw another rock when he noticed me looking down. I could see he was saying something, but I didn't stay to find out what. I went around the house checking every door and window. Thankfully, everything was locked. When I came back to my room, I had 4 messages from Chris. "Why did you leave?" "I just want to talk." "I'm sorry, all I wanted was a kiss." "You're not who I thought you were. Bye." I blocked him after that. Thankfully, I never had another incident, though I still had to see him every year at school from 6th grade to senior year. The last I heard of him, he got arrested. God only knows for what. The saddest and scariest part of this whole story? A school counselor felt comfortable telling me this kind of behavior was a compliment, and that it was just something girls have to learn from. I just hope that woman doesn't work with children anymore, and that I never, ever see Chris again. I want to remain as anonymous as possible with this. It was a very serious situation that gave me PTSD and unfortunately left deep scars. I've changed all names and places in this story so that no one can trace it back to me. I've always been a very reclusive person, ever since I was a kid. Even in elementary school, teachers would tell my parents I had antisocial behavior. I even participated in those special 20-minute speech and behavior sessions. Back then, I didn't understand why I had to be there while the rest of the class wasn't. Middle school was when the social hell of school really hit. Kids started forming their cliques, and it only got worse in high school. I never had learning difficulties, just social ones. They've improved with time, but I still consider myself introverted and a bit awkward. Even so, I've made close friends, and I'm thankful for that. But now, let's talk about girls. Of course, being socially reclusive comes with relationship struggles. To be direct, and this matters for the story, I lost my virginity at 21, which I guess is a little late. By the time of this story, I was 23, living on my own, already working in a well-paid field for a few years. I had bought a townhouse in my hometown, spacious and modern. The kind of place that impresses girls when you're 23 and you own it. One day, while swiping on Tinder, I matched with a really cute girl. Let's call her Emily. We went to a local restaurant for dinner. Throughout the date, I was in my own head, worried she was judging me or that I was acting awkward. So when I got home, I was sure she wouldn't want to see me again. But that same night, while I was in bed, she texted saying she really liked me and had fun. I was thrilled. We went on a second, third, and fourth date. Everything felt amazing once I got out of my head. We became an official couple pretty quickly. But the honeymoon phase didn't last forever. At first, you're excited every time they text or call. You crave the attention. Ideally, it's mutual. But gradually, I started feeling like she was texting me way too much, all day long. If I took too long to reply, she'd send or call. One day, while we were on the couch, she demanded that we share live location with each other. I wasn't happy about it, even though I had nothing to hide. But I did it. A couple of months into the relationship, with our locations now shared, things turned ugly. She began asking why I was at Phil's house and not replying. One night, I was at Phil's with my friend Mark in his basement, just hanging out, and Emily literally showed up at his house. Phil's mom brought her downstairs. Emily didn't hide her anger. She loudly scolded me in front of everyone, asking why I was messing around with friends instead of answering her texts about a winery visit the next day. I asked if we could talk about it later, but she insisted I leave with her. I apologized to my friends and went outside with her. We had an argument on the street. She wanted to come home with me, but I said no. We had driven separately. I drove home and told her not to follow me. Once home, I sent a long text saying I needed a break, that I needed space. Sure, maybe I should have done it in person. But honestly, I was afraid of her reaction face to face. Of course, she started calling non-stop, blowing up my phone. When I stopped replying, she banged on my front door, rang the doorbell relentlessly. My neighbor came outside and asked her what she was doing. I heard Emily screaming, calling me names. My neighbor stayed calm and asked her to go home. I listened to all of it with my ear pressed against the door. She finally left, but I was extremely disturbed. And no, it didn't come out of nowhere. There were signs, but I was blinded by the honeymoon phase. The next day, I remembered to stop sharing my location. Almost instantly, she started messaging me in rage. Every message she sent made me more certain I had made the right choice. My final message to her was, "I'm sorry, Emily. I need to block you for a while. You're scaring me." She didn't show up again, but I noticed she stopped sharing her location right away. Exactly 1 week later, I went to Phil's again. I left around 11 p.m. When I got home, I wasn't tired, and I was hungry. I heated up some food, sat on the couch, and browsed streaming apps for a scary movie. When the microwave beeped and everything went silent, I suddenly heard a click or thud from the dining room. The layout of my townhouse looped around in a circle: kitchen, dining room, living room, den, separated by a central wall. But the dining room had a closed door instead of an open arch. I muted the TV and listened. That's when I clearly heard the door between the den and dining room creak open. I looked and called out, "Who's there?" No reply. I walked in. My blood ran cold when I saw that door wide open. I always keep all doors in the house shut, especially that one. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest knife, and immediately called 911. It was my first time ever calling emergency services. I spoke loudly into the phone so whoever was in the house would hear me say, "I think my crazy ex-girlfriend broke into my house. Please send someone." I explained what was happening. The dispatcher told me to leave the house if I could. I waited outside near the door. To my surprise, the cops showed up quickly. I explained everything and led the officer into the house. We did a thorough search together. No one was there. We checked everything: under the beds, closets, couch, crawl space, attic. The officer told me to call again if I heard anything. He believed me. I wasn't imagining it. There was no way I could relax after that. I ate my food, went upstairs, locked my door, and texted everyone I knew. I tried to write it off as some creepy coincidence. I almost texted Emily, but I didn't. I took a melatonin and surprisingly fell asleep quickly. But I'm a light sleeper, and something woke me up. The room felt wrong. I checked my phone and saw tons of text from a random number. That must have been what woke me. It didn't take long to realize it was Emily. A long paragraph apologizing, begging to talk, saying she wanted to see me. The rest of the texts were her writing. "Are you awake? Wake up. Wake up." She said it 8 times. Oddly, she hadn't called me. I replied, "Why are you awake right now? This is insane. You blowing up my phone at this hour is proof enough that I want nothing to do with you anymore. Please leave me alone." Seconds after I send, I heard a scream from my closet. Emily's voice. "No!" The closet door burst open. I didn't think. I just jumped out of bed and ran. The bedroom door wasn't locked anymore. I got out, slammed the door shut behind me, and held it. She didn't just try to open it. She started stabbing the door. I saw the knife piercing through right where my side had been moments before. In that instant, I yelled, "Baby, I love you. Stop." Instead of saying she was crazy, I improvised. I told her I was going through a hard time, but I loved her and wanted to get back together. She paused, then said, frantic, "That's all I wanted to hear. Why couldn't you just be honest?" She asked me to open the door. I stalled, told her I was scared, asked her to drop the knife. She agreed. I told her to throw it across the room. I wanted to hear it hit the floor. She did. I heard it clang off the wall and fall. That's when I ripped the door open and tackled her to the floor. She screamed, fought back, went hysterical. I didn't care. I pinned her down and yelled my address into the phone, still connected to 911. To my shock, the police kicked in the front door, loud enough to echo upstairs. A lot of officers came in. Emily was cuffed, crying uncontrollably. I wasn't crying. I was in pure shock. It was the most traumatic night of my life, and the nightmare didn't end there. There was a long, painful legal process. Emily was convicted on serious charges. She's now in prison. That doesn't bring me joy. This was someone I shared my life with, someone I thought I loved, someone who tried to kill me. She was deeply unwell, and what hurts most is how oblivious I was. Not just because I was infatuated, but because of my own lack of self-confidence. I was too busy trying to impress her to notice the red flags. I know this will haunt me forever, and honestly, even anonymously, it feels good to finally share this story. If someone chooses to read it, maybe it'll serve as a warning. My name is Michael Harris. I'm 30 years old and live in Ashfield, one of those small Pennsylvania towns you only know if you've ever gotten lost around here. I'm not exactly an adventurer. I work as a forklift operator at a distribution warehouse, and on weekends, I usually scout out abandoned places to photograph. Not out of bravery, more out of that strange urge to find something that makes time feel a little less wasted. That's how I ended up at Greystone Tunnel. I found out about the place through an Urban Explorers forum, an old railway tunnel abandoned for more than 70 years. Isolated, overgrown, almost erased from maps. The few photos showed a black stone arch, half swallowed by the forest. Some comments warned not to go alone. Not because of the condition of the place, but for other reasons. Which, of course, no one clearly explained. It was a Sunday afternoon when I decided to go. The dirt road leading to the tunnel was little more than a muddy track surrounded by trees too tall for comfort. I parked in a makeshift clearing, grabbed my camera, my flashlight, and started hiking. The path narrowed quickly, forcing me to brush through clawing branches. The air grew heavier with each step. Finally, I saw it. The tunnel opened like a gaping mouth in the middle of the woods, its stone blackened by time. No gate, no warning signs. Just absolute darkness beyond the arch. I stood there for a moment. It wasn't fear, not yet, but something unsettling, like the place itself was sizing me up. I turned on the flashlight and stepped inside. The ground was gravel, with rusted tracks still faintly visible. The air inside was icy, heavy with the smell of wet stone and oxidized metal. I walked slowly, taking photos of the moss-covered walls. The flashlight's beam cut thin lines into the dark, but around me, the space felt unnaturally vast for such a confined place. Then I heard it. A crack. Not an echo of my own step, a different rhythm. I froze. Nothing. I forced myself to keep moving, trying to ignore the growing tension crawling up my spine. Another crack. Louder, and then the sound of something. Not someone. Something. Moving deeper in the tunnel. Something that was now between me and the exit. The first instinct was to turn back. But something made me stay. Maybe the need to understand, maybe just stubbornness, not wanting to feel weak in front of myself. I moved a few more steps forward. The flashlight trembled slightly in my hand. Each beam of light revealed nothing but deeper shadows, more emptiness. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly. Then something crossed the beam of light. Quick, small. Could have been a rat, I thought. A bat. Something natural. I kept going. Another crack to my left. Loud, like rocks shifting. I whipped the flashlight around. Nothing. The echo of my own movements filled the space. But buried inside those echoes, there was a different sound, a dragging noise. Slow, rhythmic, like footsteps. Hello? My voice came out weak, swallowed by the vastness of the tunnel. No response. By now, every nerve in my body was on alert. The air felt colder, heavier. I decided to turn back. As I turned, my flashlight caught something. For an instant, I saw a figure ahead, standing motionless. Tall. Very tall. So still it could have been part of the wall. The flashlight flickered for a fraction of a second. When the light steadied, the figure was gone. Silence fell again, heavy and suffocating. I started walking back as fast as I could, feeling, not seeing, that something was following me. Real fear doesn't feel like a shock. It's thick, sticky. It clings to your bones. Every step I took echoed like a gunshot. The feeling of being followed wasn't coming from sound. It came from something deeper, something primal. I didn't look back. I ran. My breathing turned shallow and ragged, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The flashlight beam jerked wildly ahead of me, illuminating nothing but endless tracks and scattered stones. Something slammed hard against the tunnel wall behind me. The sound rolled through the space like trapped thunder. I ran faster. I could see the exit, the black arch against a pale, clouded sky. Still cruelly far away, I heard the dragging noise again. Closer, heavier. I felt it. A shift in the air, right beside my head. I almost stumbled. I did stumble. I fell hard onto the gravel, the flashlight slipping from my hand and spinning across the ground, its beam throwing dizzying light against the tunnel's ceiling. In the spinning light, I saw a shadow flash past me. Something without clear shape. I crawled desperately, grabbed the flashlight, and forced myself up. Ignoring the burning pain in my knees, I ran again. Almost without realizing, I burst out of the tunnel's mouth and collapsed onto the damp forest floor. The outside world was a smudged gray, heavy with the threat of rain. Behind me, inside the tunnel, there was absolute silence. But I knew it was still there, and it had seen me. I ran without looking back. I only stopped when I saw my car, hidden beneath the shadows of the trees. I climbed inside, locked the doors with a loud click, and sat there for a moment, trying to breathe. My whole body was trembling uncontrollably. Finally, I started the engine and sped down the dirt road, the car sliding in the mud. Only when Ashfield appeared on the horizon, its faint, familiar lights, did I start to believe I was safe. But the feeling never left. For days, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder for no reason. I heard small clicks in the middle of the night. I felt that presence again, as if it were just barely out of sight. I never told anyone what happened at Greystone Tunnel. I know what they would say, that it was fear, that darkness plays tricks, that loneliness warps the senses. Maybe they're right. Maybe. But some nights, as I lie in bed, I hear a sound from the end of the hallway. A dragging noise. Slow. Rhythmic. Like footsteps on gravel. And every time I close my eyes, I see that shadow again. Standing still, waiting patiently, as if it knows that sooner or later, I'll have to go back. Every Easter, my whole extended family takes a trip to my Uncle John's house, who lives way out in the countryside. Last year was no different. Uncle John lives in a huge house, set on a wide open piece of land, surrounded on all sides by forest. Even though I've been there many times, seriously, a lot, I had never actually wandered into the woods behind his house. I've never been the outdoorsy type, so I never had much interest in nature. To be honest, I was dreading the trip. I've never really related much to that side of my family. They're all super into nature, hunting, fishing, that sort of thing. And most of them have lived in the same small town their whole lives. Every time I'm around them, I feel like the odd one out. Most of my cousins are way older than me, already married with kids or working on some farm. The only one even remotely close to my age is Kevin. He's a few years older, but he's chill. We always end up sticking together on these trips, just by default. He knows I don't really fit in, so he hangs with me without making things weird. We arrived at Uncle John's house late Friday night. I'm an only child, so it was just me and my parents in the car. I was wiped out from the drive, so I went to bed pretty much immediately. The next morning, Kevin and I spent a couple of hours in the basement playing pool. Neither of us was any good, but it was better than hanging out upstairs. The house was already packed with family by then. You know how chaotic holidays can get. We stayed downstairs most of the time, trying to avoid the noise. There was no TV down there, so Kevin played music from his phone, and we chatted about some dumb family drama, nothing worth repeating here. While we played, Kevin started talking about the woods behind the house. He said they stretched on for miles and that hardly anyone ever ventured deep enough to see the really interesting stuff out there. He described it as magical, peaceful, and isolated. I just nodded along. Nature talk wasn't really my thing, but he clearly loved it. Somehow, later that day, Kevin convinced me to go on a walk with him through the forest. Like I said, nature isn't my vibe at all, but I was bored out of my mind, so I agreed. We told Uncle John where we were going, of course. He's super chill and always lets the younger ones do what they want, a mindset I wish my parents had. Once outside, Kevin led the way, cutting across the backyard and into the woods like he'd done it 100 times before, which, knowing him, he probably had. The forest was thick, but not completely wild. There was a kind of natural path that Kevin followed. It was still early in the day, so I wasn't too worried about the sun setting. But the deeper we went, the more I started wondering how we were going to find our way back. After about 20 minutes of walking, I asked Kevin if he was sure he knew where we were. He just laughed and said he knew those woods like the back of his hand, that he'd been exploring them since he was a kid. We walked for maybe another 20 minutes when we both stopped at the exact same time. From somewhere up ahead, we heard a loud thunk, like something heavy hitting wood. It didn't sound like an animal or someone stepping on a branch. It was rhythmic. A hit, a pause, another hit, another pause. The best way I can describe it. It sounded like a hammer or mallet pounding on a tree. Kevin looked at me, and I could tell he was trying to figure it out too. The sound wasn't too close, but it was clear. He said it could be a hunter out there, but even so, he looked a bit unsettled. Eventually, the sound stopped. I asked if he wanted to head back, but he shook his head. Now he was curious. And I'll admit, so was I. So we kept walking in the direction we thought the sound had come from. Both of us much more alert now. We had only gone a few more minutes when Kevin suddenly stopped and held his arm out in front of me. I froze, thinking maybe he saw someone, but then he pointed up into the trees. At first, I didn't get it. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to be seeing. But then it hit me. There were 3 upside-down crosses nailed to 3 different trees, way higher than anyone could have reached without a ladder, easily 15 to 20 feet off the ground. Before we could even turn to leave, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I whipped my head around, and to my horror, there was a man standing there, watching us. He was dressed like a lumberjack, thick beard, heavy clothes, and he had this cold, dark stare. Kevin stepped in front of me, partially blocking the man's view of me. The man looked right at me and said, "You shouldn't be here." Kevin quickly apologized and said we were leaving, and that's exactly what we did. The man didn't move. He just stood there and stared us down the entire time as we walked away. My hands were shaking. We didn't say a word the whole walk back. I've never experienced such a tense moment in my life. We kept looking back, trying to make sure we weren't being followed. But there was no way to be sure. When we finally got back to the house, we told Uncle John everything right away. Like I said, he's a friendly guy and knows all his neighbors. That's why it made my stomach drop when he said he didn't recognize the man from our description. He asked several times if we were sure we hadn't been followed. We told him no, there wasn't much else to do. Someone even brought up the idea of arming up and searching the woods, but Uncle John didn't want to escalate things or lead anyone back to the house. Kevin and I went back downstairs, and the rest of the family kept getting ready for Easter like nothing had happened. But that encounter messed with my head way more than I let on. I went to bed early just to distract myself. But because of that, I ended up waking up way earlier than usual. I rolled over, checked my phone. It was just after 5 a.m. The sun was barely starting to rise, but it was still mostly dark out. I tried going back to sleep, but couldn't, so I decided to start the day early. Uncle John has a study on the 3rd floor, so I went up there to see if he had any interesting books. His study has this big window that overlooks the entire backyard. As I walked past it, something caught my eye. There was a faint, flickering glow coming from the edge of the woods. It looked like a small, pulsing fire. Definitely not a flashlight or anything artificial. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Curiosity got the better of me, and I had to find out what it was. So I went downstairs and stepped onto the back deck. And when I realized what I was looking at, I had to literally fight back a scream. 3 figures were standing just beyond the tree line, each holding a small torch. They weren't walking. They weren't moving. They were just standing there, facing the house, facing me. I ran straight to Uncle John's room and woke him up, telling him everything I saw. Without asking a single question, he grabbed his rifle, threw on a pair of pants, and told me to stay inside. He stepped out onto the deck and scanned the yard, rifle in hand, while I watched from the doorway. But by then, those people had already disappeared into the woods. Without hesitation, Uncle John raised his rifle and fired 3 shots into the air. That woke up the entire house. The next 20 minutes were total chaos. I'll just say this. I can't think of a worse way to start an Easter morning. The whole holiday was ruined. Everyone stayed on edge the entire day. Eventually, it was time for my parents and me to leave. And honestly, I wasn't upset about it. This all happened about 9 months ago, and Uncle John has told us since then that he hasn't seen or heard anything strange again. Still, I can't imagine living in that house, knowing there are people like that lurking somewhere nearby. If Uncle John ever tells us anything new, I'll send an update. This happened when I was just a kid, probably around 6 or 7 years old. My family has always been deeply religious, so Easter was a really big deal for us. Honestly, most religious holidays were, and now that I think about it, even Sundays felt like mini holidays because of how seriously my parents took church. It's kind of funny. Some of my earliest memories are tied to church, and what I'm about to share with you is one of them. It was Easter Sunday, and that meant the church services were extra long. I didn't mind though. My parents had planted the love of Christ in me early on. After the main service, we had Sunday school, or CCD, as our church called it. I know some churches skip Sunday school after the bigger services, but ours never did. So just like always, my parents walked me downstairs to the classrooms and said goodbye. Let me explain the layout of the church so the rest of the story makes sense. The building was split level. The main sanctuary, where the pews and altar were, was upstairs. All the classrooms were in the lower level, which was technically the basement. But since the church sat on a slope, that level had its own separate entrance and exit. Downstairs, there was a long hallway with carpet and about 7 or 8 rooms on each side, each one grouped by age. My class was one of the first rooms on the left. At the far end of the hallway were 2 bathrooms, one for boys and one for girls. And right next to those was a big, heavy gray door that led outside. That door was almost always locked from the inside, but I remember being told it could be used if there was ever an emergency. The adults would constantly remind us never to go out through that door because it would lock automatically, and we wouldn't be able to get back in. Anyway, back to that day. The lower level was totally decked out for Easter. I mean, it was covered in decorations. The walls were lined with pastel-colored streamers, paper lambs, crosses, and drawings of Jesus with kids taped between the classrooms. Some of the teachers even wore those goofy bunny ears you can buy at drugstores. Honestly, it felt more festive downstairs than it did in the sanctuary. The kids were in a good mood too, probably because everyone knew there'd be egg hunts later on. Normally, I'd wait until the class was over to use the bathroom, but because the Easter service had gone on for so long, I couldn't hold it. I raised my hand, asked to go, and the teacher let me leave. The bathrooms were maybe 15 feet down the hallway, and it wasn't unusual for kids to go alone. The rule was that if we took too long, someone would come check on us, but I don't think that ever actually happened. So I slipped out quietly while the rest of the class was busy coloring pictures of the empty tomb and Jesus rising from it. I went into the boys' bathroom and closed the stall door behind me. It was quiet in there. The only sounds were the low buzz of the old fluorescent lights and the faint echo of a teacher's voice down the hall. Then, while I was sitting there, I heard this strange scraping noise coming from the next stall. It didn't sound like normal movement, not like someone shifting or unbolting a lock. It was slow and metallic, like something was being dragged or scratched against the inside of the door. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. I wasn't really scared, just confused. At first, I figured it was just another kid, so I stayed quiet and finished up. When I got up to wash my hands, I looked in the mirror. And that's when I saw the stall door next to mine slowly swing open. But instead of seeing another kid, It was a grown man wearing a full Easter bunny costume. I clearly remember how the ears flopped forward a bit and how strange the suit looked, saggy, stained in a few spots, like it hadn't been cleaned in years. The fur wasn't bright white. It had this dingy gray tint, and one of the costume's eyes looked like it had been sewn back on crooked. Still, I didn't feel afraid. Not right away. I was so young, and in my head, this was just the Easter bunny showing up for a surprise visit. I actually smiled and turned around. I think I even said something like, "Hi." He didn't answer, just stood there, halfway out of the stall, staring at me. His head was tilted a little and he didn't move. I started to feel awkward, unsure if I was supposed to say something else. Then, after a long pause, he stepped out fully and slowly lifted one arm, pointing toward the exit, like he was guiding me out. That's when he finally spoke. His voice was muffled behind the costume, but I'll never forget what he said. "You're the lucky, chosen child. I have something special for you outside." I didn't hesitate. I was excited, genuinely thrilled at the idea that I had been picked for some kind of Easter surprise. I think the fact that we were in church made me feel safer than I should have. Without thinking, I pushed open the heavy gray door. I didn't even stop to remember that it was supposed to stay locked. The Easter bunny followed behind me in silence. We started walking across the church parking lot toward the far corner. I noticed a car parked way back there, mostly hidden by the dumpster and some overgrown bushes. I remember thinking it was odd he had parked so far away, and that he didn't have a basket or candy or anything. At one point, he held my hand. We were about halfway across the lot when I saw something that made me freeze. Another Easter bunny stepped out of the car he was taking me to. I stopped walking completely. My little brain didn't know what to make of it. I looked back and forth between them, completely confused. I hadn't seen that car before, and now there were two bunnies. Whatever magic I thought was happening vanished. Something felt wrong. To this day, I believe what happened next was divine intervention. One of the teachers, I think her name was Miss Sabrina, just happened to be outside, maybe setting up for the egg hunt or checking on something near the lot. She looked over at the exact moment I was being led toward the car. I will never forget the sound she made, the loudest, most terrified scream I've ever heard. The man in the costume instantly let go of my hand and bolted for the car, and I, without even thinking, ran the opposite direction, straight into Miss Sabrina's arms. Once I was safe, I turned and caught one last look at the car as it sped away. I'm not totally sure, but I swear I saw another kid in the back seat. Miss Sabrina didn't see, but I told her, and she believed me. The rest of the day is kind of blurry. She got the other adults right away, and later the police came and had me tell them everything that happened. They asked about the kid I saw in the car, and I tried to describe him, even though it was just for a split second, and I wasn't sure if my mind was making it up or not. My parents were devastated. My mom cried for what felt like hours once we got home. The police followed up with the church, but nothing ever came of it. No missing kids were reported in the area, so they didn't have much to investigate. The main theory was that whoever was in that costume had somehow gotten a key to the back door and had been hiding in the bathroom, just waiting. And by sheer bad luck, I was the kid who walked in. What really unsettles me is how well that person must have known the church, where to park, where to wait, how to slip away unnoticed. But the thing that haunts me the most? I still believe there really was another child in that car. And every Easter since, I think about what could have happened if Miss Sabrina hadn't been there at that exact moment. This happened less than a month ago. I'm a high school senior and I've lived in Nevada my whole life. There's not much to do around here, but one thing my friends and I always liked was exploring abandoned places. We'd look for rundown buildings, old service tunnels, dead malls, anything that looked forgotten. We'd jump broken fences, take photos, sometimes climb up to the roofs or go down into basements. It wasn't about breaking stuff or doing anything illegal. It was about the vibe. The only one in our group who always found the weirdest spots was Charles. He was kind of quiet, mysterious. He always came out of nowhere with locations no one had heard of. Half the time, I didn't even ask how he found them. One day, he sent us a screenshot from some sketchy Instagram account. Barely any followers, blurry photos, bizarre comments under the posts. The caption on the one he sent said something like, "Dozens of abandoned mines in the Mojave Desert, if you know where to look." According to Charles, he had messaged the account, and whoever ran it sent him a set of coordinates. That was all Charles needed to become obsessed with the idea. So that Saturday, it was me, Charles, and our other friend, James. I had a Wrangler that was perfect for desert driving, so we took that. We didn't have an exact address, just a general area and a pinned point somewhere deep in the Mojave Desert. The location Charles marked was really in the middle of nowhere. We had left the main road half an hour earlier, and the dirt trail we were on barely looked like a road at all. We drove for a long time. No signs, no buildings, nothing to orient ourselves, just endless emptiness. I kept checking my phone even though I knew we had no signal. James, who was in the back seat, was getting more and more irritated. He started saying Charles got tricked by a fake account and we were wasting our time. Charles insisted we keep going. He'd always been stubborn with navigation, so I gave it a little more time. Eventually, just when we were about to give up, James pointed something out to the right. At first, it looked like just more rocks and sand, but as we got closer, we saw it. A partially collapsed wooden structure built into the side of a hill. Part of the entrance looked caved in, but there was a dark opening behind the support beams. It wasn't huge, but it was clearly man-made. Definitely an abandoned mine. Charles didn't say anything at first. He just pulled out his phone, opened the offline map he'd downloaded when we still had signal, and pinned the location. Then he turned to James and said, "Told you." James said it was just dumb luck, but even I had to admit, it was kind of insane. We'd been driving in circles in the middle of nowhere, and somehow we actually found one. I parked a few meters from the entrance on a flat patch of dirt. We all got out and geared up. Charles even brought masks for us to wear. We climbed up to the mine, and up close it looked even sketchier. Charles picked up a rock and tossed it inside. We waited. A few seconds later, we heard the rock hit 3 times. And then nothing. It was deep. Charles looked at us and said, if we slipped on the way down, we'd probably die. We started descending. Luckily, the tunnel wasn't a vertical drop. It sloped down at a steep angle, but we could walk without having to use our hands. The ground was loose and uneven, with old wooden beams along the walls. Surprisingly, they still looked solid. The deeper we went, the colder and quieter it got. It was genuinely eerie down there. No more light from the entrance. Finally, we reached what looked like the bottom. The tunnel leveled out and branched in different directions. It looked like an actual mine. Support beams every few meters, rusted rails half buried in dirt, and everything covered in a thick layer of dust. Bits of wood and metal were scattered around, maybe the remains of tools or carts. It smelled old, if that makes sense. That's when I realized how much the masks were helping. We picked a tunnel and started walking. Nobody said much. We weren't looking for anything in particular, just exploring. Honestly, there wasn't much down there. Looked like anything valuable had already been stripped away. But then, we heard something. It was faint, coming from deeper down the tunnel. It sounded like something being dragged. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but I saw Charles stop too. James motioned for us to turn off our flashlights. We did. We stood there in total darkness, listening. The sound came again. It was the sound of dragging, like metal or wood scraping across the ground. Hard to tell. The echo made it hard to pinpoint, but you could tell it was getting closer. We stayed frozen in the pitch black for maybe 30 seconds, maybe a whole minute. Hard to say. The sound kept coming, slowly getting louder. It didn't sound super close, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Then James accidentally flicked his flashlight on for a second. I wanted to kill him. The sound stopped. Total silence. And then, out of nowhere, came a metallic crash from deeper down the tunnel, like whatever was being dragged had been dropped. And right after that came the most horrific, inhuman scream I've ever heard. It sounded almost human, but not quite. We ran. Didn't care about the noise we made. I've never run that fast in my life. You could hear footsteps behind us. I thought I was going to have a panic attack. I was in the back, trying to keep up. Then I tripped on something. One of my shoes flew off, and I struggled not to fall. No time to go back for it. Just kept running, ignoring the pain in my foot. Up ahead, Charles and James were already climbing the sloped part. I basically threw myself up the incline. Climbing out of that mine with one bare foot was the most painful thing I've ever experienced. I'm not exaggerating. It was pure agony. Every second, another splinter. If it weren't for the adrenaline, I wouldn't have made it out. When I finally reached the surface, my foot was shredded. James and Charles practically had to carry me to the car. I couldn't drive, so James took the wheel. I barely managed to close the door before he floored it. I don't know if we were followed out, and I don't care. We drove in total silence to the nearest hospital. The pain was so bad I thought I'd pass out. I ended up getting a tetanus shot, and after they cleaned the wounds and pulled out the splinters, I still couldn't walk properly for several days. A few days later, when I could walk without limping so bad, James said he'd probably lost his wallet near the mine entrance when he helped me to the car. He hadn't said anything at the time, but now he wanted to go back. Just to the entrance, absolutely not inside. So the three of us went back, using the pin Charles had saved. Of course, James's wallet wasn't there, but we did find my shoe. It was just a few feet from the mine entrance. I walked over to it cautiously and picked it up. The shoe was torn to shreds, like someone, or I should say, something, had bitten it. There were teeth marks. Whole chunks were missing. We didn't stick around after that. None of us can come up with a rational explanation. You might say it was some homeless guy living in the mine. But if that's the case, how'd he survive that long? There was no food down there. What would he eat? Charles said the Instagram account never replied when he messaged to tell them what happened. It'll be a long time before I think about exploring the desert again. I had spent a few days in Austin visiting friends. I live in Louisiana, so it's pretty much a full-day drive. On my last day in Austin, my old friend Tom replied to one of my Instagram stories asking when I was leaving. I said, "Today." He said he lived about an hour outside of Austin, which, as it turned out, was right on my way home. I hadn't seen Tom in years, and it would be nice to catch up. He told me I should stop by, and I thought, why not? I plugged the address into the GPS. About an hour and a half drive. Tom and I had been friends back in high school, but we lost touch after graduation. We still followed each other on social media, but we hadn't spoken in years. When I pulled up to his house, I noticed it looked a bit old. Not run down, just aged. The wooden porch creaked under my feet. When he opened the door, I caught the smell of old wood and something rustic, like an old cabin in the woods. Tom was super welcoming, gave me a big hug and pulled me inside. Some friendships stay pure no matter how much time goes by. The inside of the house was just as old as the outside. The furniture looked like it had been there since the 70s. Every step on the hardwood floor gave off a soft creak. It had that Texas vibe. Honestly, kind of charming, like stepping back in time. We sat in the living room, catching up and drinking whiskey. It was about 5 p.m. by then. One drink turned into two into three. And before I knew it, I was drunk. The warmth of the alcohol made the room feel smaller, cozier, but also heavier. Hours passed like minutes. We were having such a good time that eventually he asked the question I knew was coming. "Man, it's a long drive back. Why don't you crash here tonight?" I hesitated, but he was right. I wasn't in any shape to drive. I said, "Good idea," and asked if I could take the couch. He said, "Nah, I've got a spare room. Nothing fancy, but it's better than the couch." That worked for me. We ordered some Chinese food, and after eating, he led me down a short hallway to the guest bedroom. I didn't pay much attention to the room. I was drunk. So was he. But I remember the air felt still, like the room hadn't been used in a long time. I barely had time to register anything before collapsing onto the bed, completely exhausted and drunk. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. My mouth was dry, my head was spinning, and the room was dark, except for a bit of moonlight slipping through the blinds. That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, on the closet door, something was hanging. At first, it looked like a long black coat on a coat rack, but as my eyes adjusted, the shape didn't feel right. The upper part was broad, almost like shoulders, and the way it hung, it didn't look like fabric. It looked like a silhouette. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't remember seeing that when I stumbled into bed, but I'd been drunk. Maybe I just didn't notice. I rolled over, trying to ignore it. It's just a coat, nothing more. But I couldn't help myself. I peeked again. Still there. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath, and forced myself to sleep. I don't know how long I was out before waking again, but this time it wasn't just the discomfort that woke me. It was a sound. A slow, soft creaking, like someone carefully stepping on old wooden floorboards. My eyes shot open. The room was dimly lit now. Dawn creeping through the blinds. I turned my head toward the corner. My stomach dropped. The coat was gone. I sat up so fast my head spun. My body buzzed with a sickening mix of fear and leftover alcohol. I scanned the room, heart slamming against my ribs. But the corner was empty, just a closed closet door. I threw off the covers and rushed to Tom's room. He was snoring, completely unaware of the panic storming inside me. I shook him awake, which wasn't easy considering how drunk he was. He finally woke up, rubbing his eyes, confused. "The coat," I said breathlessly. "The one on the closet door in the guest room." He squinted at me. "What coat?" "The black coat, the one hanging on the closet door. It looked like a person." Tom sat up, more alert now. "I don't own a black coat, man. I don't even have a coat rack in that room." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for him to admit it was some prank. But his expression stayed serious. "Come see," I said. He sighed, but got up and followed me back to the room. I pointed at the exact spot. It was right there. Tom scratched his head. "Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" "I know what I saw," I said, my voice shaking. "I woke up and it was there. Then I woke up again and it was gone." We stood in the room for a few moments, the same eerie silence pressing in on both of us. Finally, Tom exhaled and agreed we should check the house, just in case. We searched every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No strange coats. No explanation. Eventually, Tom tried to convince me maybe I'd been in some half-dream state, seeing things. And honestly, I wanted to believe that. I really did. Because the alternative was much worse. As soon as the sun was fully up, I grabbed my stuff, said goodbye, and hit the road. I almost felt guilty leaving him there alone. The whole drive back to Louisiana, my mind kept circling back to that moment, waking up to that coat-shaped figure staring at me from the corner. And the way it was just gone the next morning. Maybe Tom had played a cruel prank, but to this day, he's never admitted to anything. Or maybe, just maybe, there really had been someone in that house, watching me sleep. And they decided to leave before the morning came. I shouldn't have left the main trail. I say that now, of course. At the time, it felt like one of those rare opportunities the job sometimes throws at you. Finding something no one had mapped, no drone had flown over, no bored hiker had posted about on Reddit. But now, looking back, I realize that was where everything started to fall apart. My name is Travis Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, a freelance cartographer, and I spend most of the year driving through places where GPS still hesitates, where road signs are more decorative than informative. That week, I was in Arizona, near an abandoned reserve, updating topographic data for a navigation app. It was my third trip to that region, and I already knew the main paths. Then I saw the fork. A subtle curve in the terrain, almost as if someone had hidden it on purpose. The trail looked old. The rocks were worn in a way that suggested regular use, but not recent. I got out of the truck, left the engine running, a habit I've always had in remote places, and walked a few meters. The vegetation was sparse, the heat unbearable, but there was something ahead. A crack between two rocks. The entrance to a cave. Of course I went in. I took some photos, marked the coordinates on my portable GPS, and went further. The temperature dropped quickly. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being absorbed by the walls. 10 minutes into the cave and I had no signal. No bats, no animal tracks, just rock and silence. Then I found the wires. They were thin, almost invisible, running close to the ceiling, hidden under layers of dust. I followed one with my flashlight to a metal box fixed to the wall. It was a camera, analog, old, and it was pointed at me. I froze, looked back, nothing, just darkness. Looked at the camera again. No visible battery, no power source. It looked like it had been dead for years, and yet it felt like I was being watched. I moved on, slower now. I passed 3 more cameras, each with a specific angle. At every turn in the cave, it seemed like someone knew exactly where a person would hesitate. Until I reached what looked like a room, a larger cavity with an iron table in the center. On it, a tape recorder. I pressed play. It worked. A voice whispered my name. Frozen, I listened to the rest of the tape. You have entered Zone 6. Proceed. I didn't recognize the voice, but it seemed to know I was coming. I looked around. There were finger marks in the dust on the table. Someone had been there recently. Next to the recorder was a wooden box, locked, but the latch was broken. Inside, I found something I didn't expect. Maps. Lots of them. Some hand-drawn, others printed on vellum. All showed underground mazes with segments crossed out and numbered. One of them matched the trail I had just walked, marked with a large red number, 6. I took the maps and stuffed them into my backpack. From that point on, something shifted. I began to hear sounds. First distant echoes, then something that resembled an electronic hum. I wasn't sure it was real. The sound came and went like interference. I kept exploring. The passages seemed to change. Even though I marked the turns with chalk, I sometimes ended up at the same point without realizing it, as if the cave was redirecting me. In one of the side passages, I found a metal cabinet embedded in the rock. Inside, a clipboard with notes. Observations about behavior, response time, psychological resistance. My name was on it, written in firm handwriting, as if it had been noted in a hurry, but long ago. I felt a chill. The clipboard read, Subject T. Mitchell. Entry pattern within expected margin. Do not intervene until phase 2 signal. I ran, screamed for help, but my voice vanished into the stone's curves. I ran for minutes that felt like hours. At some point, I must have blacked out. I woke up outside the cave, lying near the truck. The engine still running. The radio was static. I went back to the motel without looking back. I told no one. The next morning, I tried to return to the site, but I couldn't find the trail. The fork was gone. The vegetation was untouched, as if no one had ever walked through it. Weeks later, I noticed the object in my backpack. A small recorder, identical to the one in the cave. Inside, a tape. When I pressed play, I heard my own voice saying, Zone 6 confirmed. Phase 2 in progress. I never recorded that, but even stranger was what came after. A second voice, lower, almost inaudible, whispered in the background, You came back. We are ready. Since then, all my maps have started showing small changes. Trails that didn't exist before. Markings I didn't make. Places I've never been. And the number 6, appearing in corners where there should be nothing. My name is Daniel. I'm 36, a history teacher, and I've been living in a small condo building since 2020. I've always had a habit of eating breakfast on the balcony. Simple ritual. Eggs and toast, black coffee, and the quiet of early morning. My building has 3 floors. I live on the 2nd. The apartment above mine had been empty for over a year. Then one day I noticed signs of life. The iron chair on the balcony above had been turned outward. The next day, an empty glass appeared on the ledge. On the third day, I stepped out with my breakfast, and he was there, sitting, completely still, staring straight ahead, though it didn't seem like he was looking at anything. He was an older man, clean-shaven, dressed too neatly for just sitting on a balcony. "Good morning," I said. He didn't respond, didn't even glance at me. It felt awkward. I went back inside, but the next day he was there again, and the day after, and the day after that. Always at the same time, always silent, always still. Out of curiosity, I started timing it. He stepped onto the balcony at exactly 6:42 a.m. every morning. But what bothered me the most was that he never drank from the glass. In the third week, I started hearing noises at night, always after 2 a.m. At first, they were soft, like slow, deliberate footsteps above me. Not normal walking. The steps were too far apart, like someone pausing between each one. Then came the scraping sound, like an iron chair being slowly dragged across the balcony floor. One night, I stepped onto my balcony to look up. The apartment was pitch black, no light, no movement, but the glass was there, same place. And next to it, a second glass, clear, with something inside. A dark, reddish liquid. I didn't touch it, didn't say anything, just went back inside. The next morning, both glasses were gone. The next morning, I decided to try again. When I stepped out with my coffee, he was already sitting there. "Good morning," I said again. He turned to me. For the first time, his eyes were sunken, deep circles under them, like he hadn't slept in days. But what really froze me was his expression. Calm. Too calm. "I'm sorry," he said, voice dry, raspy. "I didn't mean to bother you." "You're not," I lied. "I just hadn't seen you around before." He paused, then said, "Do you mind if I keep using the balcony? It's important to me." "Of course not," I answered. He gave a faint smile, then stood up, walked inside, and shut the door. That was the last time I saw him. The following week, I noticed movement in the building. Police, the superintendent, neighbors whispering. An ambulance came, but didn't leave with anyone. I asked the building manager what happened. He hesitated, then said, "The man in 302 was found on his couch. Looked like he was asleep, but it had been at least 3 days. But I talked to him 2 days ago," I said, confused. He looked at me seriously. "Daniel, he hadn't left the apartment since Friday. The autopsy will confirm, but we think he died before then." I didn't say another word, didn't mention the conversation, the smile, or the second glass, which was back on the balcony the next morning, this time with fresh coffee inside. These were tonight's stories. If any of them made you look twice into the darkness of your room, or reminded you of something you'd rather forget, then this channel has done its job. Leave a like. It's how we know you made it back in one piece. Subscribe and keep walking with us through the shadows. If you've watched all the way to the end, comment, "I saw it all." That's how we know who truly walks the night with us. And if you have a real story, something you've never had the courage to share, send it to the email you see on screen. You might just be the next to be remembered here.